You're looking at Moscow, where the Russian government has been cracking down on protests against the war in Ukraine. Welcome back to CBS Mornings. This footage shows one protest being broken up earlier in the war. But anti-war demonstrations are now rare as the punishment for telling the truth has become far more severe. To escape the crackdown, hundreds of thousands of Russians have left their country. Lilia Luciano shows us the painful struggle of one Russian family to get out.
Yulia, her 2 children, and the few things she carries with her are now tucked into small spaces at her sister Olga's home near San Francisco.
When do you start suspecting that you didn't really have a future in Russia?
I think the strangest thing is I could even now have a future in Russia, building my career, raising my kids, but I don't want to be scared for them to be persecuted for something.
In the largest country in the world, there's little space for dissent. Protests against the invasion have met harsh crackdowns. News outlets are being silenced, and new laws threaten jail time for spreading so-called misinformation about the Russian military.
I'm actually very angry that I had to go. But what did it for me was another of Putin's speeches when he said, when he mentioned atomic weapons and things, I was like, now I'm scared.
Yulia, her sister Olga, and her brother Yakov are all U.S. citizens. Their parents fled the Soviet Union in the 80s as political refugees, but after college, Yulia returned.
Russia was very exciting. It was new, there was so much happening, and it just seemed very free. Cut 20 years later, I'm a refugee again.
Retracing the steps of her parents.
I'm trying to fight the feeling of being a failure. It's like my parents did so much to get us out, and here I am again.
Yulia and her 2 children are dual citizens. That American passport makes them the exception, giving them an easier way out. But she left behind her 93-year-old grandmother who didn't have a visa. Her brother Yakov, visiting Moscow from his home in Massachusetts, took over to try to get her out. But he soon realized what he was up against.
We talked to almost every U.S. embassy in Europe.
Seeking freedom or fleeing the crushing consequences of sanctions, many Russians are trying to escape. But where Europe is opening doors to Ukrainian refugees, Russians are finding a dead end.
It's really tough for Russians.
Anaida Sadikian is an immigration lawyer in Los Angeles helping Russians file asylum claims.
All the sanctions that Western countries took against Russia, there is basically no flights. It's really hard to get out of right now.
Out of options, more Russians are heading to Mexico where it's easier to get a tourist visa. They then make their way to the U.S. border, where many are now camping out along with Ukrainians and Central American refugees seeking asylum. More than 7,000 Russians have entered the U.S. through the southern border this year. That's almost double the number from last year.
Who were the people fleeing?
Most people that I see are supporters of the opposition, bright individuals, educated. Some people are members of LGBT community. It's like younger crowd in their 20s.
I think it's going to be really bad for Russia, not just in an economic sense, but like in a cultural sense.
But hope isn't out of the question, even for an elderly Russian grandma.
We're coming.
During a Zoom call, Yakov shared with us the news they were all waiting for.
The embassy in Yerevan approved visas for my grandmother and sister and brother-in-law. We got visas and tickets.
Yay!
Yakov was able to fast-track an emergency visa appointment in Armenia because of his grandmother's medical issues. And after a month and a half, the family finally welcomed their matriarch to the U.S.
Mission accomplished.
But one thing remains clear for them. They are the exception.
I have this like guilt kind of complex about it, the fact that we were able to find connections that helped us expedite it. For people who don't have that, we're trying to get out. I mean, it's near impossible.
For CBS Mornings, Lilia Luciano, San Francisco.
As Lilia says, hope isn't out of the question.